those of you who don't know me, I'm David Benham. I'm a software deployment manager here at HUBzero. And today I was just going to briefly go over what HUBzero is doing with Windows tools. So let me start the presentation here. I got multiple windows and desktops and mouse cursors all over the place. So there we go. Basically, just to give you a little background on HUBzero and Windows. The initial effort we did for this was for one of our hubs called CDMHub Composites Virtual Factory. They came to us with wanting to put together a virtual workflow for some of the high-end CAD tools and design tools that they were using to develop composite devices and components. So we started the effort with them in 2016, about Q4. And up to that point, we were a Linux-only shop. So this was our first dive into the Windows world. Let me see, next slide. So today, I'm just going to go over briefly some of the main points that we encountered and some of the challenges and some of the interesting things that I think we encountered along the way to implementing Windows. And as you can see here, I'll have 4 of those points. So the first thing we wanted to touch on was Active Directory. HUBzero is primarily an LDAP. We primarily use LDAP on a Linux platform. We've been doing that for a while. So shifting over to Active Directory wasn't too difficult because basically Active Directory and LDAP are essentially the same thing. Active Directory is very LDAP-like. One thing to note is, as a team, we did have to bring on a Windows resource to help guide us in that initial transition, because I think the combined total of Windows expertise that we had in the team was about the equivalent to 1 person, and that was across 3 people. And no one had recently worked with Windows or Active Directory. So some of the key points with Active Directory, as you can see here, GPO, we'll go over each of these. GPO is the group policy editor. That allowed us to do some environment customizations. For those of you who are familiar with Active Directory, it's the basic tool that Windows uses to kind of manage environments for end users. And it was a big deal for this particular client, CDMHub, because they wanted a lot of customizations. Simple things like desktop background. You wouldn't think that that's a big deal, but it's important that when they're giving demos on their end, that when they bring the tools up that you see. And we'll go into a demo after all this so you can see it live. I'm just going over this in a little detail now. But they wanted desktop backgrounds, icons. They wanted a customized start menu to help guide their users in the half a dozen or so applications that we had to set up for them. Group permissions also allowed us to, or group policy, GPO also allowed us to manage program permissions. Some of the software we were dealing with this particular client had some stringent licensing, so we had to make sure that the right people could use the right software and the wrong people could not use the right software. In addition to GPO, one of the challenges with bringing Windows functionality to HUBzero was communicating between LDAP and Active Directory. We had to write some custom code to sync up our LDAP server to Active Directory, and it wasn't too bad. It was some PHP that allowed us to sync the users and the groups, and the synchronization only goes one way, from the LDAP to the Active Directory side. I think going forward, we're going to try to either pick Active Directory or LDAP as a standard across the platform, so we don't have to communicate between the two, but that's something we'll take care of internally, so end users shouldn't notice a difference one way or the other. Just to wrap up some Active Directory considerations, when we started planning Active Directory, anyone who knows about widespread Active Directory deployments knows that enterprise level Active Directory planning can be kind of complicated with the forests and the subdomains. So we did need to bring on some specialized staff for that. But the key point for all of this was, if we wanted to leverage Windows, we had to fully embrace Active Directory, because that's the way that Windows manages the environments. So that was something new for us, Active Directory. in order to actually deliver remote desktops or remote tools via Windows, we investigated a number of tools, but we ultimately decided to use the Citrix tool, because in the end, it was the most solid solution that we could find out there for desktop access, remote desktop access, and just overall management of the environments. We did look at AWS AppStream, and for those of you who aren't familiar with AWS AppStream, it's Amazon put together a service called AppStream for running online game demos. So they had a really high graphics performance to market to game companies so that they could pre-install their demos on these servers, and then users could come, and rather than download a 30-gigabyte game install to play the first level of the game, they could just click on some Amazon server and get a remote desktop experience, and they could play the game online over a remote desktop connection. Ultimately, we couldn't use AppStream though, because they didn't offer us the amount of flexibility we need. So we looked at Citrix, and fortunately, this project had the budget to allow us to look at Citrix, and overall, Citrix was a very solid solution for what we were looking for them. First off, with the client side, when you connect using Citrix, and I don't know if any of you have used Citrix before in the past or recently, they do have an HTML5 based viewer that allows you to get in without installation of any software, which is a very nice feature for the low barrier of entry. And it also, Citrix offered an OS-specific client software that users could install that would give more functionality than just the HTML5-based viewer, because obviously HTML, being in a web browser, you have to kind of lock down the security, and you have limited resource or limited availability to the resources on an end user's client computer. But when you install the Citrix client, you got open access to files locally. You can do clipboard, copy and paste back and forth. And the cool thing about the Citrix client is they had support for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Oop, I'm trying to navigate here. Press the wrong button. Another key component of Citrix was the ability from the back end to manage root images with regards to deployment and to make sure that the right people could look at the right environments. One really cool feature that we haven't leveraged yet was the ability to auto-scale the Citrix servers so that we could auto-adjust based on needs of the application. So if 100 users wanted to come log in a short period of time, we could actually fire up some servers on the fly. It turned out that we couldn't use that feature as much as we wanted to, because some of the servers we were deploying on the Citrix side were 350 gigabyte servers, images for the client that we were working with. But for smaller deployments, it's a very viable option. And for other hubs that are interested in the functionality, we'd definitely be able to offer some work with that. The one key thing that brought us to Citrix, though, was the high-performance graphics capabilities of the platform. The client that we were working with, CDMHub, had some very high-end CAD applications, and if any of you have ever worked with CATIA and Abacus, you'll know that those applications demand a lot of GPU horsepower, and it requires a pretty high-end PC if a user is installing that software locally. So the Citrix solution allowed us to do a really good job streaming high-definition video. And for those of you who've ever tried to stream video, high-def video, especially over a shared desktop connection, you know that doing that well is difficult. It's cutting edge right now in terms of doing that well. And Citrix has to offer a product called Citrix HDX that does it very well. I mean, basically, if you think about it, when you're streaming HD like that, you're competing with a 1-meter monitor cable. I mean, when you're dealing with a local workstation, and all the delays happen within like a meter of the computer. And if you bring that into the broadband world, there's a lot of, any of you who've done online gaming especially would know that delays and graphics issues become really sensitive. And it's only been in the last couple of years, I think, that the internet in general has had the performance to offer an experience remotely that matches the experience of high-end users like CAD users and gamers are used to on their local systems. And like I said earlier, we did investigate AWS AppStream early. And like I said before, they did online video game demos, so that was their key market. So it was a perfect fit for that. Just didn't give us the flexibility we needed. And the cool thing about this overall approach with high def video is over the internet is that NVIDIA actually has an application or an offering now called GeForce Now, where gaming is a service. You have people that pay $7 a month, I think it is, to log in and play their games online, so they can use a real low-end computer with a decent network connection, and they're connecting to some pretty powerful hardware. So we were able to leverage the Citrix high-performance, the HDX system on this project. Switching gears here, another component that I wanted to cover was our use of AWS with regards to our Windows efforts. HUBzero in general is moving towards the AWS infrastructure. We're gradually moving all of our on-premises stuff as possible over to AWS. I mean, we won't be able to move everything over, but our goal is to move everything over that we can. Good thing about when we were investigating Citrix is Citrix has a very tight degree of integration with AWS. You can set up your AWS accounts in Citrix, and Citrix will use AWS resources to deploy your Citrix-based back-end servers. So it was a great fit overall. The cloud in general, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's more of a Windows presentation, but storage was a huge thing, especially for this particular client, because they don't know how much storage they need. We started off with 1 terabyte, but if they decide they need 10 terabytes down the road, we'll be able to give it to them. You can easily back it up and restore it. AWS has tremendous ability to a variety of compute resources. I mean, virtually unlimited for all practical purposes. For those of you who've dealt with it, you know the different types of virtual machines that you can get. The one thing that we were very specifically needing in this case was the GPU instances, the ones with the graphics processing unit, so we could get some of that high definition graphics to our client. And the key takeout of this being that you complete server deployment in minutes. That just helps us with those Citrix deployments and some of the scaling stuff that we were doing. AWS we use for some other stuff. We use it for DNS, Route 53. We use some VPC stuff, a lot of snapshot storage and management for our backups, and we do some resource tagging so we can pass along specific costs to specific projects. And then before we dive into the demo, the one last thing I wanted to cover was just the topic of cost. Windows isn't free, Citrix isn't free, and up to this point, HUBzero has been used to offering FOSS-based solutions. So this was a hurdle that we had to overcome with our thinking, but we think that there's a tremendous opportunity out in the market because people would keep asking us for Windows stuff. But I think once someone asks us for Windows stuff and we tell them, yeah, sure, we can do that, and then we start bringing up costs, they realize, oh, they're a little less excited about it. But the key is, I mean, it's Windows. So, and the overall solution isn't free like a lot of the stuff we've done in the past. So cost with regards to AWS, just a short note, I mean, I'm sure some of you have dealt with if you've tried to deploy cloud environments and where you work, you know, you've run into some of these issues. Finance and accounting often aren't used to the non-fixed costs of AWS. They're used to buying servers, one-time costs. They're not used to variable monthly bills. Some of the challenges we had in deploying this solution, this Citrix solution on AWS for the Windows functionality, was we'd get have trouble with apples to apples comparisons, because apples to apples comparisons are hard to make in the cloud world. So we'd have pockets of tech people that would try to compare AWS to on-premises software and hardware deployments, and they'd fail to consider total cost of ownership issues. And in the end, it's kind of difficult to put a price on some AWS features. Cost for on-demand stuff on AWS, when you need a server, you ask for it. That's called on-demand. That's a somewhat pricey option for AWS. If you know you need certain machines ahead of time, you can do reserved instances, and that can alleviate some of the cost. Another part of offering a Windows solution at HUBzero was the actual cost of Windows. Windows is licensed software. Because we used AWS, though, the Windows licensing fee was included in the hourly charge for the instance that we get charged. So there was no separate licensing that we had to take care of with respect to Windows servers themselves. One key note is if you at a large organization, a lot of times you have your own license, BYOL. Bringing your own license over to Amazon can be a little challenging. And the one thing that we ran into with issues in this was when we wanted to use Citrix with Windows on AWS, we had to use the remote desktop functionality of Windows, and that is set up separate from general Windows licensing. So that was a challenge that we had to take care of as well. And then was the cost of Citrix. Citrix clearly is not free open source software. The problem was all the open source solutions that we investigated didn't have an idealized client experience. The three keys you see there, seamless file sharing, clipboard cut and paste, and a variety of client support were huge issues for this particular client, so much so that they were willing to pay the premium of using Citrix in order to get those bits of functionality, because on the HUBzero team, and a lot of our users up to this point were kind of hardcore Linux people. They had no problem moving files from one place to another generally, but some of the users that we were trying to focus on in the particular marketplace for CDMHub, the users weren't quite as tech savvy with regards to getting working in remote environments. So Citrix offered us a solution that allowed us to streamline that quite a bit. And ultimately, HUBzero will be able to share licenses across multiple hubs once we are able to offer Windows to multiple users. So that is something we will plan on doing to kind of alleviate some of the cost of using Citrix. So you won't be, our individual hubs will not be shouldering the entire burden of the licensing, because we'll be able to, as we have more hubs interested in the feature, we'll be able to get the licensing spread across multiple hubs as needed. So with that being said, I was just going to hop into a real quick demo of the one organization, CDMHub, that we've put this together. Are there any questions at this point that anybody wanted to shout out before I jump into the demo? Okay, I don't see any, so let me bring over another window here. Actually, I'll just get rid of my presentation window and go to CDMHub. Actually, let me go ahead and log out, and I'll do the full login just so you guys can see what CDMHub is. So I just log out. CDMHub, like I said, was the composites virtual factory. They work with composite materials, and for those of you who don't have a background in the manufacturing, those are really lightweight, high-performance materials, as light as carbon, fiber type stuff, but really super strong. And in the Composites Virtual Factory group on campus here through the IACME Institute, wanted to put together the ability to work with outside clients to help them design composites in an online environment with some industry partners that they had identified. So they wanted to be able to offer the software to them, and they also wanted to offer the expertise of a number of professional students, faculty, graduate staff, to help them, especially smaller manufacturing shops, with the overall design flow of these materials. So let me go ahead and log into their site. And they have a basic, a whole bunch of infrastructure that they needed to manage what they wanted to do. But what we're here to see today are just the remote desktop environments that I set up for them. So if anybody on their team or any of their industry partners log into the site, they can come here, click on one of these desktops, and It starts. I thought it might come on my other screen, and then here they're in Windows right now. This is the environment that we put together for them. It's completely runnable over the Citrix client. The one key, if you look at all the applications that we have installed, some of that group policy stuff I was going over earlier, that allowed us to do this setup, so this could be customized for the users logging in, as well as the applications that they all have access to. But if we want to go to the desktop, we also put some shared environments in for them to store their projects in, that terabyte of shared space. If CDMHub came to us today and said they needed more space, we could just use AWS to increase the space of this share, and we'd have them up and running within the day. And this environment, it's not easy to demo this environment over a WebEx meeting, because the solution is optimized between the servers out on AWS and Citrix with my laptop here. So you won't see the full effect of being able to do really cool, interesting things over the presentation, because we have the presentation software kind of getting in the way. But you can go to this site and actually watch YouTube videos over. And I'm not sure how this is coming across the WebEx software. WebEx is not optimized to give HD video. Sorry about that. WebEx is not optimized to do HD streaming. But if any of you ever want a demo, we could try to set up one with you to actually, so you can look at the types of streaming performance you'll get, and especially the response time performance you'll get when you're using this actual solution over a desktop on your local client. So we use this solution for the CDMHub folks, and they've been quite happy with what we've done for them. We're really looking to roll this Windows solution out to additional people, additional hubs. So if any of you guys are interested, or if you know someone who's interested, please feel free to give them all this information on this presentation. Put them in contact with Claire, Eric, or myself, or anyone at HUBzero for that matter, and we'd love to talk more about it.